All right. Well, just want to welcome everybody to our Facebook Live event for National Travel and Tourism Week. We are back again today with Al Kidd, and we're so excited to have him join us today. So Al Kidd is, and I'm Kendra Fry, President and CEO of Experience Bryan College Station and Executive Director for Bryan College Station Sports and Events. And we're joined by Dominique Powell, who's also our Director of Sports from Bryan College Station Sports and Events. And now let me introduce you to Al Kidd. Al Kidd is the President and CEO of the Sports Events and Tourism Association, or Sports ETA in our alphabet world. He has more than 35 years of experience of advertising, sales, marketing, venture capital investing, risk management, executive leadership, and nonprofit experience. In the last 3 years, Al has repositioned and rebranded Sports ETA, establishing a more inclusive brand to lead the sports events and tourism industry and its membership. Al serves on the board of directors for USA Fencing and the International Association of Events Hosts. And I have had the pleasure of working with Al for several years now through Sports ETA and my work with them and being on their board. And Al, it is a pleasure to have you joining us from sunny San Diego, California.
Well, thank you, Kendra. And, you know, there's days I really appreciate and want to thank you. And there's days that I question that on you being part of the search committee to bring me on board. I wasn't quite sure exactly what, I don't think none of us really knew what we were getting into, and we certainly could not have predicted what the predicament we're in now. But yeah, I must say that you've done a tremendous job down there, and soon after you were part of the team that brought me on board, you assumed the role of the leader of the pack down there. And Dom has done a great job under your tutelage and development from professional development. So you guys are really making your mark down in Texas. And as you know, it's a fairly crowded field down there. It's a big canvas. But you guys have done a great job, and I genuinely appreciate your leadership and all the things that you've done for us, for me personally, and particularly for the members of our organization. So,
well, thank you so much, Al. I really appreciate that.
I would like to see if I can get some of that tea set in the background. My wife gave ours away when I moved to Cincinnati for a while. I came home and the house was just about emptied out, but I do need to get that. So.
Well, you know, we may get to a point where I need to sell it. So.
Yeah.
All right. Well, without further ado, we'll let you go ahead and get started. I'm going to get everything situated here, and we're going to turn it over to Al.
Great. And however you want to handle questions towards the end, I'll be here as long as you all want to have me here, and I'm honored to answer anything I possibly can. And I think people who've gotten to know me over the time that I've been associated with our membership is that I'm pretty straightforward, and there's not a question I won't feel comfortable answering. Sometimes people don't like the answers, but the reality is, you know, we are in a time where crisis management is really important, and I can lean on the background that I've had in running and operating large companies, and particularly advertising, marketing, and been involved in very, very specific crisis management issues, all being very similar, none to the degree and extent that this is, in that this affects virtually every aspect of the American economy, from the various funding mechanisms within cities and communities to the supply chain that runs all the way through every single aspect of our country, unemployment, and all the aspects that you all have seen too much of. So I will kind of walk through a story, if you will, on how we have come to the position we're in right now. I see it down there. So when we first sat down last January and we're doing our planning for the next couple of years for the sports industry and events and tourism, we looked very closely at beginning to prepare what I called at that time a disaster plan. Little did we know that the disaster would be a pandemic. The disasters we had in mind were things like floods and hurricanes and tornadoes that were devastating many of our communities, to the point that it was almost every month we were trying to support a community somewhere that had a natural disaster. So we put into place a number of practices then, and the precursor has turned out to be a lifesaver for us, because we reorganized the company. We eliminated some redundant costs prior to us even having to look at it from managing the business we're in. And our job as a membership is really to serve 3 constituencies. Now we've just added a 4th. So destinations, which include sports commissions, some cases Chamber of Commerce, and destination management organizations, or CVBs as they're often called. Second, our industry partners. Many of those industry partners are allied industries within the tourism or events business. So we have organizations like consultancies, lodging, hotels, and a variety of support industries around that area. The third area is events owners, or rights holders as they're often called in our nomenclature. And the 4th business that we just really got started on is around facilities. And so what we did was we built a brand new service line to try and provide more services and better resources to all the different members we had. When I first took over, the name of the association was the National Association of Sports Commissions. And relatively speaking, from a research standpoint, the number of members that were sports commissions versus industry partners or CVBs or others was fractional, about 10% of the members. So we looked at the entire value chain of what happens when you do sports events in communities, or how do you impact the economic growth and vitality of a community through sports tourism. So we developed a plan around rebranding and renaming, and we did that really under the guise that we would provide a wider swath of services and products and resources to our memberships in total, not just singularly around sports commissions. So we developed a very simple process of what are our pillars of excellence or key performance indicators around those. And so very quickly, we determined that education was one of our primary aspects of what we needed to do to try and help professional development and amongst our members, and to provide educational leadership for developing bigger and brighter and smarter people. The second served on advocacy, and that meant that we would play a national role in trying to develop programs around how do we support all the various kinds of members. If you go to the relaunch, the very second slide, I'm kind of stuck at that point. One there, right there. Perfect. Thank you. And the third area was resources. That included research, developing new products and things that we could build around websites and communication and digital broadcasting. And the fourth was networking, which became our national meeting, our very special meetings around chief executives, Women's Summit, and our educational forum called 4S. So those were the 4 pillars. And so we began March, after developing the plan, to really begin to build that out and expand from what we did the first couple of years under Kendra's tutelage. And when COVID hit, I happened to be traveling to San Diego, where I actually live, and my wife lives. And I wasn't in Cincinnati, and that's when the governor put a stay in place. So I've been marooned in San Diego, unfortunately, since the 1st of March. But since I'm a marketing person, what we kind of looked at this sports business, there's 3 distinct phases. We had the reaction phase, which we're in the tail end of the reaction phase right now, the recharging phase or recovery phase, and the relaunch. So the area that we play the most important role is recharging and revitalization and recovery information. We play a little role in the relaunch, and we'll get into that in a moment. But the reaction phase was highlighted by OMG WTF. It was like, holy cow, what have we gotten into? You know, people tried in the early days, they denied the fact that what this pandemic represented from the highest levels of our government on down to your next door neighbor. And so as it kind of circulated through, the impact became very apparent when they shut down sports and events started getting canceled, because they found that the transmission of this event was highly virulent and aggressive. And so group gatherings became very, very suspect in being able to have. So then the government and the leaders slowly decided that kind of staying into place was important. And about that time, your destinations realized that no one was staying in hotels. And part of the issue of not staying in hotels is that your destination management groups are really funded, primarily 97% of them are funded through hotel motel taxes. So when your revenue stream goes to zero, you end up having some issues around, you know, how is that going to carry the day? So that led then to forced business decisions. So why don't we go to the next page, the next slide. And so in those destinations, they had to sort out, what can we provide? Here's our revenue. It's for all intents and purposes gone to zero. that reaction phase began to do the sorting of the layoffs. What do we keep? What can we do? How do we manage it with limited revenue? Some of the destinations had reserves, but what we've come to learn through massive amounts of research that I read every morning, charts come to me automatically, and I try to keep as present as I can, is that about 80% of the destinations had furloughed people across the country. It appears right now that the general average from the destinations is 35 to 40% of their budget will be their budget next year. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out the destinations are going to be impaired from the financial resources that they had last year. This year it's kind of like murky in how we're going to get through, and next year looks to be a picture that's going to be painted a little differently. So destinations are going through that sorting process. Some of the sports commissions, many dedicated sports commissions also had owned and operated events, which they made some good revenue off of, and those came to a screeching halt. So the two main primary revenue sources in the sports industry were events that were taking place on large scale, and local events. Youth tournaments were no longer in play because of the group gathering side. And also the people that had owned and operated events. So destinations were looked to be, every main revenue source was impaired. The industry partners who are part of this solution, including the hotels, were devastated. You saw a lot of the news about closing of hotels, massive layoffs. So with no people staying at their hotels, they had to try and adjust their business to equivocate to the revenue they were having. So with that then, not soon after, they started closing the supply chain around that. So your waiters, your food service, your foods, your napkins, everything that's made to support that portion of the industry became challenged as well. The third group within this segment that it takes to stage events includes the event owners, or what we call rights holders. So the rights holders are codependent upon destinations and industry partners to stage their events, both economically as well as functionally in terms of services. So the rights holders then go to the destination, and oftentimes they were given hosting fees by the destination to be able to bring their event to the community so that the community would benefit from the hotel stays and the economic impact that rights holders would bring into a community. Industry partners then had no hotel stays, and so those were under problem. And so part of the revenue, and oftentimes for rights holders, is they also get rebates on some of the hotel nights that are stayed. So their two primary outside resource revenue were challenged as well. So their host fees and their rebates from hotels. Now, some are membership based and they still have a membership source of revenue, but the rest of us in all the other three portions of this segment I've talked about are all codependent somewhat on hotels and what happens as a result of hotels, which creates some of the fees, which creates some of the events. And so that is the situation we're in terms of what it looks like. So, the recharge phase, which if you go to the next slide, is the phase we're about to enter. So in the recharge phase, we began aggressively to provide resources of information. People want to know about the COVID, they want to know the spread, they want to know some of the guidelines around how the spread works. Then they want to know about the CARES Act. And we were very deeply involved from an advocacy standpoint, supporting all the organizations going to Capitol Hill to try and get funding. Unfortunately, they found out that the CVBs and the 501c6s, which is a technical name for a certain type of corporation in the nonprofit world, were not included in the funding. So while our organization is going to get some PPP capital put into and infused in our organization, the CVBs just were left out in the cold, literally, with that. So with that, then the recovery guidelines, we're now in the midst of shifting from an informational-based resource to a recovery program. So we were a traditional trade association providing the 4 pillars I talked to you about earlier. You can stay on that recovery page. So what happened then with some of that is, as we began to look at the recovery, we were involved in forming, being parts of some coalitions on some very large national basis to develop guidelines and rules and how we come out. And so when you have a baseball tournament going forward, oh my gosh, you can't be in the dugout next to somebody around you, can't choose sunflower seeds. So there's myriad choices that are now coming to light. And one of the flavors of the day is that this is Baskin and Robbins on steroids. There's more than 31 flavors of how each organization is going to come out, state by state. They're misaligned. Some have very, very strict guidelines. For example, there's a group out in the West Coast, California being one of them, that their final guideline for recovery is there has to be a vaccine. Well, that's a pretty steep, mark to hit. Now, other states aren't that much. That's compounded right now by the fact that consumer behavior is showing that while states may open, there's some real significant discomfort with the health and the potential health risk of actually attending some of these things. So there's a psychological damage that's happening. There's a state-by-state differences. States are governed by city mayors, by state governors, and then you have, of course, our president. All have different points of view. The scientific community has different points of view. Associations are doing their thing. And in our world, the NCAA is coming out with their own rules by sport, same with the national governing bodies for Olympic sports. So we've got more and more of these complicated integration issues that we're going to be facing in the sports world, none of which is unsolvable. It's just that this playbook has never been played before. So sometimes we as leaders don't even have the questions to be able to get answered. And certainly the answers are being made with a lot of things that are outside of our control. Like when are they going to release group gatherings? When are people going to feel comfortable traveling on airlines again? When are kids going to want to play competitive travel sports? How's the economic compression with layoffs going to affect their ability to support those? There's a lot of issues that are still unknown, and we are not in the prediction business. We're not going to talk about when. We don't know when. We're going to react as time goes on. But our commitment to our members and people on this call is we will resident all the information we can possibly find about recovery. On our website right now includes, or will by the end of today, will include all 50 states' guidelines as published. And you can imagine this is a very fluid bit of information, and every single day we're going to be updating that. We're also publishing organizations that put out information about the recovery, associations, you name it. So this coalition is working very closely to work through that. The future financial implications are what are the resources that these destinations are going to have to be able to continue to subsidize some of the sports. The rights holders are challenged somewhat. They're used to some of this in terms of support and being able to stage events. But they realize that it's going to be a challenging time. And so this recovery is really different than what's taken place historically with any other crisis that's occurred. In the early days when we were kind of reacting, we were trying to compare to 9/11, and then they tried to compare to 2008. And then some people went all the way back to the pandemic in 1918. And while there's a lot of similarities to that pandemic, that actually petered out over 3 years and had many spikes based on the aggressiveness of that disease at that time. And it actually went away after a large number of people passed away. Our guidelines were in the midst of, trying to come up with solutions from a scientific standpoint. I think governors, mayors, and the like, and the federal government are trying to open up the community so that some of the business can start to transact and people can get back to some level of community and some being. So it seems like we're getting a lot of questions. I'm more than happy to stop there. I see I don't appreciate the one person that decided to cuss in the middle of that, but I appreciate your frustration. But we finished the base story on where we are, and happy to answer anything specific, Kendra. I'll leave that back to you.
All right, let me get us back here. And okay. All right, so we do have, and I'm now finally, okay. Someone is asking to add on. Okay, so Dom, I'm gonna ask you, I cannot see Facebook at this moment, so do you have any questions that you have been given?
Not currently on Facebook, but Al, can you talk in general kind of the differences between, people know conventions and that side coming back versus what the different challenges are for sports events may be compared to your average convention, seminar, thing like that?
Yeah. Yeah, the biggest thing, Dom, with that is the pressure around group gatherings. And that has two sides. One that has a political side and a business side, which, can help fuel some of the recovery in terms of general business that takes place. There's also the psychological side from the consumer feeling comfortable and safe in trying to come to those kinds of activities. Some of the most recent studies I saw yesterday that a large group of people that responded to the survey really are not going, don't intend to travel more than 500 miles. So what that's leading to on the sports side and probably the convention side is a demand right now for local, regional, national rolling out. So this is going to be a phased rollout. Don't know how long it's going to take to get it all rolled out. It's certainly going to look different once it is rolled out from all the economic reasons I just cited a couple of minutes ago. And that from what I've gathered with the scientific community, I've been a number of calls with the scientific community, is the real comfort around the full health issues centers on, am I going to get it or not get it? And that will play in the back of consumers' minds until they're comfortable with that. So with some of the calls we've been involved with some of the professional leagues, you've seen everything from no fans to some kind of staggered fan situation. I've listened to how they intend to deal with that in terms of if they do open up and have staggered attendance inside of a building, how do they treat using the bathroom facilities? How do they treat concessions? So there's a lot of those types of things are in development, and they will continue to develop and roll out. And as part of that rollout, they are probably going to look different on a state-by-state basis. So that pressure is going to carry over into group gatherings, not just sports, but conventions, trade shows, festivals, concerts, movie theaters, anywhere where groups of people gather will be in some kind of a relaunching stage in how those guidelines actually take place. So while the guidelines can be produced by all these organizations, the thing that they have been able to solve is how do we create comfort for our consumers? And that'll be the second part of how this plays out, Dom.
So Al, I do have one as well, kind of talking a little bit in tune with what you were just talking about. But for instance, here in Bryan College Station, our own community, we're working on what we're calling Operation Restart, which is not necessarily a certification program or anything, but it's guidelines and protocols that are a little kind of a step above what we've heard from the national government and what we've heard from our state governor, just to try to encourage our businesses to go a little bit above and beyond what those baseline practices would be. And I know that our rights holders, and some of them are kind of creating their own safety measures and what those are going to look like. And I know we've been hosting some things on the Sports ETA website and such. Is there a way that we can look at those different things and try to connect our practices with their practices so that we're making sure that even within our own Operation Restart locally, that we can connect the dots and make sure that our safety measures are meeting up with their safety measures? And how do people get in contact with those measures?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's a little complex in this sense. We are part of a large national coalition that includes International Association of Venue Managers, who spearheaded the start of this thing. So it's alphabet soup. Everybody and anybody is involved in that coalition, but we also have people from the infectious disease control group. We have CDC people. We have the hoteliers in that. We have some of the Congress involved in that. And so that's probably the biggest grouping of common interests around developing guidelines, templates, and so on that I think will serve it well. There's a lot of people in a panic right now to try and get some guidelines out. So you're getting so many cross-purposed documents. Some are going to be more complete than others. It just depends on the scope of who they're including into the discussion. I suspect within 30 days, this coalition will come out with some pretty wide-ranging templates and guidelines. But in the meantime, one of the things that's hindering some of this is what is the liability that goes along with publishing guidelines and rules. And unfortunately, this country is very litigious. And as a result of that, people have to be careful on how they communicate that out, and what are they communicating? Are they communicating suggestions? Are they just guidelines? Do people have to indemnify the organization publishing those guidelines in order to use them? Because what you don't want to do is guidelines get published and a bunch of people get sick, and then there's lawsuits flying all over the place. So currently, the next phase of the stimulus coming out of the government, unfortunately, isn't going to the hospitals or the municipalities who are going to need it most. The next stage are going to need money. Is going to try and mitigate this and give protection to those that are producing guidelines for the relaunching, and not allow people to be sued for that. So that's front and center with the congressmen and the senators right now, driven by IAVM, and of which we are a part of, and there's a large group of organizations a part of. And one of the first steps to the relaunch and the comfort of creating those kind of guidelines will be to eliminate as much as possible the ability to be sued. And once that's happened, then we can go back to trying to provide stimulus to the municipalities who are now facing some drastic cuts because they don't have the transit occupancy tax numbers they had before. And how does that play into what kind of services they can provide? So all those launches, everyone's trying to put out their own data. I don't see anything wrong with that, because those are the guidelines you're going to put out. The only thing I'd caution, just in trying to be safer than sorry, is just check with your legal. And if you need to have some kind of paragraph for use or something, you're always safer than sorry in doing something like that.
Perfect.
So that doesn't answer your specific question. I don't see a specific alignment coming out where there's going to be one set of rules. We tried to serve a little bit and coalesce some of the NCAA and some of the USOPC, and they're each going to have their own guidelines. So they're trying to make sure they measure what their members need and their people they serve need. And so those guidelines are going to be theirs. While it might be nice to have something that's more generic, broadly. So we're going to be posting as many of those guidelines on our website. So we hope to have a pretty good library of selections and choices that people can look at and beg and borrow from those as those are produced.
Right.
And Al, as we close this down, just kind of last remarks. It seems like everyone's kind of looking at sports as, this whole recovery thing. You see every day in the news, everyone's looking for when is sports going to be open. Can you speak to that opportunity the sports tourism market has to, really, yes, it's a lot of pressure, but there's a lot of opportunity to really be the leading force and to, bringing things back to normalcy?
Yeah. First, I don't know what normalcy is anymore. I'll guarantee you this, whatever it is, it's going to be different than it looked yesterday. And it's going to be shifting for a while. Yeah, that's right.
The next norm.
Yeah. Whatever that norm is, and I'm not sure a norm ever existed, but so there's a lot of debate about historical reference to sports and the value and how it leads out of disasters. I'll cover that for a brief moment, but virtually everybody in America at some level growing up as kids participated, for the most part, I can't say everyone, but most everybody participated in some level of sports. Whether it was through the little leagues, it was some kind of youth group soccer, AYSO, whoever it was. Could have been basketball. We had physical education in school. We had physical education in high school, elementary school, and all those existed as a way to ingrain sports into people's psyche. Water cooler talk every Friday was who had the best football team in Texas. You all know how that works down there. And so the fiber of that community pride, it grew into local colleges, local professional teams, and the pride that carries over that. So sports is a base core fiber piece of most Americans. That fiber was one of the leading ways out during the recession, deep recession of 2008 and after 9/11. And those are two entirely different crises coming out. The 2008 crisis was as much economic and more widespread than 9/11. And there was some impairment with unemployment that created the inability for a lot of people to be able to support group travel for youth sports. Well, now that you've eroded away physical education, hardly exists in schools anymore, kids are going to other places, and that led rise to the whole club and travel sports phenomenon. And so after 208, that grew. After 9/11, around American Pride, sports, particularly youth sports, really grew. There were some limitations based on people's reticence to travel by air. It took 2 years. If you study that problem back then, it took 2 years, and that was relatively small, contained. This is that kind of psyche on steroids. So trying to predict when that's going to come back with comfort, again, we won't get into that. But what I see different, there's a couple things different now, Dom, to that point about where sports positions itself. One is, most likely what'll lead out of sports this time will not be the youth sports and the tournament sports. And I differ with my peers that talk about that for all the reasons cited during this conversation today. The fear of travel, the fear of group gatherings, the millennials' absolute fear of their kids getting sick. The research has come out that the limitation on travel is going to be local, regional, national. So those large group gatherings of 800 volleyball teams in your convention center, while I love them and they're great for markets, can't predict when that's going to happen, but that's going to be phased in at some point at a later time. So the group that can coagulate like topics quickly are professional sports. Like it or not, NBA, NFL, baseball, they've got 30 owners. They can talk about it. They can make decisions very quickly. They can get resolution. They can go through and get that. So that probably appears right now at this stage to be the first coming out. Then if you focus on the youth sports, focus on local. And if local didn't generate hotel stays, you're going to have to find other ways to make revenue to support your community. And it may be the local regionals, you've got to spend more time on selling the local restaurants or in getting them to go to local attractions before they turn around and drive back home again. So that is the transition to the group gatherings for the youth will be past the midpoint of the recovery, in my opinion, and based on the data we're seeing by lots and lots of smarter people than us, including the scientists. And that data really hinges on a vaccine and a solution that people have cold comfort that my young son or daughter is not going to get sick and put my grandparents into some kind of real life problem.
Well, before Kendra sends you off, I want to say A&M is the best football in Texas. Just wanted to put that out there before we sent you off.
I love it. Well, your rep of the color is pretty good. So yeah. I didn't tell this to Kendra, but I purposely did not wear my UT shirt because last time I did, it kind of irritated her and she had talked to me for a couple of days. So I didn't do that. So
yeah, that's not appropriate.
Yeah, and San Diego State, like, who cares? So I don't do that anymore either. So
well, we want to thank you, Al, for your time today. Thanks for sharing all the information that I know that Sports ETA is working hard to collect and trying to make sure that it's disseminated to everyone so that we can create our own plans and that we can move forward and try to plan ahead for whatever the next norm is going to be. We know that even in our own community, we do have some sports events that have maintained currently, and we daily watch the news and daily listen for what those different things are going to be. And we're creating our own, like I said earlier, with Operation Restart, kind of our own plans and processes in the community to try to mitigate some of the safety issues. So thank you again for your time as always. And I appreciate you spending a little bit of time in Texas with us today. So we appreciate everyone for joining us as well and listening in to our continued tech talks, as we're calling them, the tourism education talks. Looking forward to seeing everyone tomorrow about the same time at 2 p.m. where we're going to visit with Callie Thorndike, who is from our local Embassy Suites Hotel. And she's going to talk a little bit about kind of what's going on with the hotel industry and about some meetings information that we have too. So we look forward to seeing everyone, and just always remember that we're going to keep staying in the spirit of travel because that's what's going to get us through all of this. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Great. We
ended. I think we're off live.
Oh,
wait, did he hang up?
Yeah.